social commentator Achike Chude joins me now for more on this. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Now, let me get your feeling of this recent report by the UNDP. 170 children die every day, according to report, and these children are under the age of 5. And on the whole, it is reported that over 300,000 children have lost their lives so far.
Yeah, it's a horrendous situation. It's a very terrible situation. Sometimes you don't know how serious it is until you put it in figures, just like we have seen 170 a day in a particular country would make it one of the worst in any part of the world that you want to consider. Talk about Yemen, talk about Afghanistan, and some of the troubled spots in the world. It was previously thought, before this report came out, that the estimate was put at around 35,000. Yes. But you're having a whopping 350,000 people in a period of about 10, 12 years. And it is horrible, it is tragic. And it should be a call to arms, especially by the federal government, whose responsibility it is to protect our territorial space and to keep the citizens safe. Obviously, there's been a failure. Obviously, the society and the country has failed its most vulnerable population. That is the little children, yes, who are bearing the brunt of what is happening. Obviously, it's very clear that those who are the victims are people who do not really have anything to do with the insurgency, and the violence that's been going on. These are young children and women, and it's horrible. Let's put
to proper perspective what this says of our effort over the years to addressing these issues of insecurity in that region, which is already trickling down to other parts of the country, because like you rightly pointed out, the primary purpose of any government is security of lives and property. What does this say of the efforts we have said we have made, the monies we have injected into fighting this war?
Well, you can only measure success by the result you get, and you cannot talk about successful prosecution of the war against insurgency in the country if we are still having this kind of a statistic. It clearly shows a failure in our ability to stem the tide. And 170 is, like I said, a very horrendous figure that you keep on having. So obviously every attempt we have made, and of course attempts have been made, but all of these attempts have not resulted in anything meaningful in terms of impacting negatively against the people that are responsible for this. So I don't know whether to say we'll go back to the drawing board, but sometimes you tend to have the feeling that, and that's a horrible feeling, that it would appear that the Nigerian state, the Nigerian government, and even the Nigerian people have resigned themselves to this recurring nightmare of people being killed, especially children in this instance. And because nothing, has nothing successful has been done to curb, what is going on. When you do that, of course, you're going to see a reduction in the incidences of violence in parts of the country, especially in that part of the country, and especially, in the number of casualties or victims that you have. Obviously, that has not happened, and that will tell you that despite our best efforts, I want to believe that we have, made efforts, but despite these efforts, that we have not been able to achieve desired goals and our objectives of keeping our people safe, and that is unfortunate. But I think what is even more fearful and more worrisome is the fact that we are, I won't say it's a don't-look mode, but we seem to be living with the failures that we have from that particular.
What should we do as a people? What can we do? Because the responsibility does not lie with the people; it lies with the government.
Look, some of us have posited. First of all, if we're operating from the premise that the state has failed in its ability to keep Nigerians safe, and from what we have seen, from these results, from this statistic, the state has actually failed. They have not been able to stop it. So if that is the case, do we keep on doing what we have done, hoping for a different result? That will be madness, like people have said. So we must be able to rejig the entire, concept of how we want to keep the country safe. One, the security agencies have not done well in spite of their best efforts. We have lost a lot of good men in the process. So that means we must put something else in place. We must get the people involved, the communities involved. And we have always said, that, in some parts of the North, people have always touted the success of the civilian JTF. They have been involved. Yes, we have been involved in in counter-insurgency measures, working closely with our security, forces, and that's what I expect, especially in those outskirts, because it is those outskirts that are the most vulnerable places that are prone to attack, because these are softer targets. And apart from, because you find out that Maiduguri is heavily fortified, and you have a lot of military people and the activities of hunters and civilian JTF. So you need to be able to deploy some of these people, civilians, under the supervision of federal authorities, the police, the army, and all that. Since we also lack the personnel, we do not have enough of security personnel in the country. That's another thing apart from the issue of weaponry and the rest. So the civilians will be much more motivated to protect their turf, to protect their territory, even than the military personnel themselves. So they need to own it. They need to know that they themselves are charged with the responsibility of keeping their wives and their children and their community safe. And you will see much more dedication from that. So, but we expect them to work with the federal authority, with security authorities. They must be armed, they must be trained. And I think that would also help, especially when it comes to giving them, providing the required number of personnel that is needed, to boost the fight against the insurrection. So I think that is a major way to go. So we must begin to rethink our security architecture, with regards to confronting. Otherwise, you're exposing these people continually to being, killed and murdered that way. And that, again, will be a dereliction of duty by the federal authorities.
Now, the report says that with another decade of conflicts, that number that it talked about in terms of over 300,000 could grow to more than 1.1 million.
Yeah.
And you would recall, sorry to cut in, that the former Chief of Army Staff said that it would take us over 2 decades to address this.
I think that was not his mindset before he was appointed Chief of Army Staff. That was not his mindset. And I remember even from the previous administration of Goodluck Jonathan, when I think the former, Chief of Army, I can't remember, the man that was killed along the Kaduna-Abuja road, when he was appointed, he was saying it was going to take him a few months to deal with the insurgency in the country. Before the president was elected, and after he was elected, he had made statements to that effect, that it's going to be a matter of months before they get rid of the insurgents and so on. Obviously, they made these statements maybe off the cuff. They had not exactly done in-depth study of the situation, of the insecurity crisis in the country. That was why they were so wide off the mark. Now, the Army General who made that statement about taking 2 decades and so on, I think it was the reality that he saw. Not because the Nigerian Army lacks the ability in terms of having the right kind of mindset to be able to stem the tide of insurgency, but because of so many other plethora of other issues that are also linked. The issue of inadequate, not being well kitted in terms of having all the necessary, weaponry that they need in the battlefield. That is one. The issue of the morale of the men that has gone down over the years because of the losses that they have been suffering, and the fact that the allowances are not paid as and when due. These are also issues that are mitigated against, the military achieving the kind of success it would have wanted. And then again, the fact that the insurgency and some of the insecurity going on in this country is not just a domestic or localized issue. It has become internationalized. Of course, you have the ISWAP operating together with Boko Haram and some other foreign elements, those that came in from Libya. So that has made the situation very, very complex. And so as the Nigerian government is also making moves, and changing their tactical plans to confront these people, they are also making their own plans to also evade being defeated by the Nigerian forces. So these are some of the issues. So it has become almost intractable. So it's not just we need to do much more. in terms of ensuring that the adequate funding is made available, to the Nigerian army. Also, at the same time, to ensure that the corruption, which has also been a bane in the prosecution of the successful war against the violent insurgents in the country and all the other armed groups in the country, that we bring it down to its barest minimum, because that also has played a part in making it difficult for the Nigerian army to also combat the insurgency. And because by the time this started, the first few years after it started, I was making a case that the Nigerian government needed to deploy everything, that's available at that particular point in time, because the more you allow this thing to fester, the more invincible it would appear that these organizations become, the more difficult and intractable the crisis is going to be, become, and that is what we have seen. So he says maybe a decade, 2 decades, but it can be stopped even before the end of the decade. It just depends on commitment. It depends on the political will by the government, and then all the other things that they also put in place to ensure that our troops operate with the right kind of environment.
Right.
Yeah.
So and this report has gone to show the urgency required to addressing this issue, because 1.1 million is a lot. From this report, if it festers for a decade. And
part of my problem again is this.
Yeah.
You see, they're just talking about the Northeast, what is going to happen in the Northeast. You're also not talking about, for instance, the number of displaced people.
Yeah.
Around the Lake Chad region, it's about 3.2 million, and this, and of course, I projected that it will get to around 5-point-something million in the next few years. Now, that's a horrible situation. But beyond that is the fact that if you are not able to stem the tide, if you're not able to stop these people in their tracks, they're going to be emboldened. And one thing I keep on reminding people is that Boko Haram started somewhere from a very small point and then spread to a local government, went beyond the local government, became a statewide issue before it became a regional issue, talking about the Southeast and even parts of the Southwest. So if care is not taken, because they have not told us that they are restricting themselves to a particular territorial space within the country.
Absolutely.
When they feel that they are strong enough, they will make a move towards other regions of the country. The governor of Kaduna State has told us, of course, whether it is banditry, whether it is Boko Haram insurgency and so on, he has told us that the violent operators within Kaduna State have left and no longer operating within the rural areas, but are now moving towards cosmopolitan areas. The governor of Niger State has also sounded the alarm. So we have a problem. So it's not just about limiting them or restricting their operations and their activities to the Northeast. It is going to go beyond the Northeast. If you look at ISIS, for instance, when ISIS at a time took essentially over almost all of Syria, and the very large parts of Iraq, do you understand? And now we have an affiliation of ISIS, now ISWAP, teaming up with Boko Haram. So we should not think that they want to play within certain territorial spaces. I'm sure that they have ambitions, and that this ambition is to expand beyond the territorial space that they are presently occupying. And that's why we must be up and doing. We must begin to not just completely continue to be on the defensive, wait till the attack and then we'll repel them.
Can
we must go after them.
Because some persons, some Nigerians believe that it has gotten to a level where we need some level of support from external, allies to addressing this issue. Is that what you see here to addressing this? Well,
terrorism has been, was long internationalized, and so the fight against terrorism has also been internationalized. That's why you have, different bodies. For instance, this report that we're talking about, we're discussing, is a report of the United Nations, UNDP.
Yeah.
And so you have other, state actors being involved in the fight against, terrorism, insurgency, because we know that the reach of terrorism is not local, it is international. And so the reason why some countries, especially Western countries, are making so much investments in Africa, like you have what the French government is doing in Mali and Niger and so on, is so that they will not be able to export terrorism to their own countries. So they are fighting terrorism, let's just say, beyond you know, their countries, and they are trying to wage them here in Africa. So we need that help that comes from that. And of course, the issue of, you know, international financial transactions and so on is what the United Nations, I think they have a body that's in charge of that, so that to also stem, you know, the money laundering and the funding of criminal activities, yes, and terrorism and all that. But at the same time, we should also be careful because there is also this catch that the terrorists seem, you know, sometimes for certain foreign involvements tend to become a magnet for terrorists. Also, for instance, America begins to operate now, and maybe they put boots on the ground in Nigeria. It becomes a magnet for other terrorist organizations to come and to engage the American government or the French government in Nigerian soil. And the implication is very severe. We have seen that in Iraq. We have seen that most especially in Syria. Because do not also forget that, I mean, the origin of some of these terrorist activities, ideological, the Middle East, and all that. So America continues to be a country that a lot of terrorist organizations, you know, see as the enemy that must be destroyed. So sometimes when you get involved in some of these countries and you get them involved, especially physically, in the attempt, I mean, the operations against insurgency, like I said, it tends to draw, you know, the terrorists like a magnet to engage them within the territory, and in the process, a lot more calamity and destruction is caused to the country. So we must also be careful about the kind of help we will get from these people, yes, and how you go about it. Now, but obviously, help is needed because we have shown that we lack the capacity to address it, and that's why the president was begging the American AFRICOM that is now based in Germany to come to Nigeria after the Nigerian people and Nigerian government under Yaradua had resisted every attempt by AFRICOM to locate itself within the territorial waters of West Africa.
All right, now the other issue is we have seen the level of attacks on schools. Now that is before this report came up, and the concern now is what the future holds for children who are said to be the leaders of tomorrow, what the future holds for even the country as a whole.
Well, long before now, we have not shown as much interest as we should with education in the country. And I'm not just talking about this government, even previous governments. Look at the continuous battle between the ASO and then the federal government, between the non-academic staff union and the federal government and all that. So it has been an ongoing thing. And then we now have this new phenomenon of schools being attacked and then some schools being shut down in the Northeast. Of course, it's a very terrible, I mean, the future is very bleak, not for the children, not just for the children and the society, but the country at large. Because there is a price we have to pay for not being able to develop, you know, our educational sector. And I think over the years we have been paying that price. The fact that you know, and part of the insecurity in the country is because a lot of children, you know, were not sent to school. So and the thing about education is that education has a way of opening minds. Education has a way of increasing the stake, not just for the society, but for the individual that is educated. So you find out that when somebody is educated, he understands, you know, certain values that an uneducated person might not understand. He also understands the value of work, you know, and the value to move in a particular, you know, direction. You know, and once you don't do that, such people fall prey to recruitment, for instance, by some of these terrorists and some of these gangs and all that. So it's important, but unfortunately, the educational advancement of especially the North, where schools are being, you know, closed, is going to be affected badly, you know, as the years, you know, in the coming years. And I think that is also not good.
Killings, it's also a complex, the problem just gets being
complicated. No, because you can't open the schools. I mean, the government has proved unable to protect the students. I mean, the students. And so if you leave the schools open, you leave them vulnerable, you know, to attack by these people and to kidnap. And the danger, you know what I mean, is a catch-22 situation.
Right.
You know, it's between the devil and deep blue sea. If you leave them open, these children are going to be kidnapped. Some of them are going to be killed. And then in order to rescue these children, you have to pay the kidnappers more money, and they're going to use more money these monies to fortify themselves and carry out more attacks on more schools. So we find ourselves in a very difficult and impossible situation. So what I think what we can only do is, first of all, keep the children safe. Education will suffer, but that is the price we have to pay for not being able to do what we should do with regards to securing the lives of our children and schools and protecting the schools. You know, so we have to keep the schools closed for now, or maybe you send these children to some other places where the schools are much safer, and then look for ways to keep, to now successfully carry out or prosecute whatever, battle you're having against these people, so that children can go back to school later.
All right, we'll leave the conversation